The first 7 lines of Vergil's Aeneid, arguably one of the greatest works of Latin literature, declares itself to be a tale of a refugee from the famous city of Troy, who brought his old gods to Italy and eventually founded the race of people who would lead to the Romans of Augustus's time. So we begin with these famous words, Arma virumque cano, arms and the man I sing. And these words are so famous, there have even been ancient Roman graffiti found with these words, and poets after Vergil referenced and punned on them. They are also important in setting up both Vergil's outline of the poem and his literary antecedents, and the great debt Vergil owes to Homer. The arma, war, or technically weapons, but through a figure of speech called metonymy, we can generalize this to war, directly hints at Homer's Iliad, a Greek epic poem about Achilles and his wrath during the Trojan War. This also points ahead to the second half of the Aeneid, books 7 through 12. The virum, man, refers to Aeneas, our hero, but hints at Homer's Odyssey, the other great Greek epic poem about the Greek hero Odysseus and his travels around the Mediterranean after the Trojan War. This points ahead to the events of the first half of the Aeneid, books 1 through 6. But even though Vergil references Homer here, he's also preparing the stage for a reversal of Homer. So the traveling around the Mediterranean happens before the wars, and unlike Odysseus, Aeneas is trying to find a new home instead of returning to an old one. And the hero Aeneas will also be cut from a different cloth than Achilles and Odysseus. And many times in the Aeneid, we see the distinction between Homer's heroes and a more modern hero whose responsibility lies not with himself and his greatness, but with his people and his people's future glory. So we stop after Cano and pause, because the next 6.5 lines will outline in a greater detail the rest of the Aeneid and the future of Rome up to Vergil's time. A pretty weighty task for so few a number of lines. We begin at Troy, which this word qualifies the oris later in the line, but the next words, qui primus, really governs our thought. This refers to virum, the hero of our epic. Aeneas is the first person to come from Troy to Italy, but since another Trojan Antenor, we will learn, also led a group of Trojans to the northern part of Italy, many people take this primus to just mean leader, like the first or the most important man to his followers. We also learned that our hero is exiled by fate, fato profugus, on his way to Italy and the Lavinian shores. The adjective lavinia here, which has a consonantal I in order to fit it into the meter, lavinia, refers to the Latin town of Lavinium, which Aeneas will found soon after the events of the Aeneid, and he will name it after his future wife, Lavinia, the daughter of the Latin king Latinus, who famously says not a single word in the Aeneid, but she does famously blush. So this adjective here is anachronistic because the shores may have been Lavinian in Vergil's time, but they most certainly weren't when Aeneas came to them. And by the way, Italiam and littora are both accusative of motion towards. Poetry can omit an ad in certain places. Also, weighing it is perfect tense because of the length of the E. It's long. When it's short, it's present. When it comes versus weighing it came. The ille in line 3 refers again to Aeneas. He is jactatus, tossed, multum, much, with 2 ablatives of location, et terris et alto. In the Aeneid, you will frequently see this word, altum, which comes from the adjective altus, meaning high, to instead mean the deep, as in the deep sea. We superum, in line 4, continues our thought by giving us the cause of his being tossed, by the force of the gods. Superum is a syncopated form of superorum, genitive plural, and Vergil will often omit the or part of the orum ending, so virorum becomes virum, deorum becomes deum. And this is one of those things that you should file away. When you expect a genitive plural, but are presented with something that looks like an accusative singular. But it shouldn't be too surprising. I mean, this ending, this ending, is the third declension genitive plural ending. So this prepositional phrase that finishes off line 4 shows synchistic structure, A, B, interlocked word order. on account of, takes the accusative, which is iram, rage. Memorem modifies iram and saiwai. Cruel modifies Eunones, Juno, the queen of the gods, and one of our main, if not the main, antagonists. Okay, so let's think about this a bit more. Rage can't be mindful, but it can be cruel. And Juno, sure, she's cruel, but she's also never forgetting. So in many ways, this is also a transferred epithet. The sense tells us that memorem should go with Eunones, and the juxtaposition of these words kind of reinforces this thought. Line 5 brings us back to our hero again, though with passus, having suffered. Multa here is neuter accusative plural, many things. And we finally get a resolution with a string of events following dum. Dum, when it takes the imperfect subjunctive here, and that's what conderet and inferet are, means until, not while. The city he's founding, you would think it's Rome, but no, this is Lavinium, which I talked about earlier, which happens after the events of the Aeneid. He will also bring the religion and customs to Latium, most notably the lares and the penates, but Vergil sprinkles all throughout the Aeneid bits of origin stories for Roman customs that he has Aeneas or his Trojan followers institute. It's also significant that Vergil uses the verb condere here. This means to found or establish, as in founding a city or establishing customs, but it can also mean to plunge or thrust, as in plunging a sword into someone's chest. As Aeneas wanders around the Mediterranean in books 1 through 6, Vergil uses condere with its founding a city definition, but as he fights in Italy in books 7 through 12, Vergil uses condere more with its plunging a sword meaning, and it's no coincidence that this verb shows up in the last few lines of the entire work. The founding of Rome requires the plunging of a sword. The last line and a half, starting at genus, but really unde, from where or whence, lacks a verb, and many editors suggest using came or arose, but these three represent the three different parts of Roman history after Aeneas. He founds Lavinium and the Latin race. Then his son Ascanius, also named Iulus, founds the city of Alba Longa. And finally, Romulus, a distant descendant of Aeneas, will found Rome. These last three words, Otai moenia Romae, are pretty neat, so there's a bit of a transferred epithet here. Rome's walls are high, but Altai technically modifies Romae, the walls of high Rome. So why would Rome be high? Maybe because it's exalted, the greatest city in the world, according to Vergil. Maybe because Rome was famously built on 7 hills, so a traveler sailing up the Tiber River, as Aeneas will do in Book 8, will come upon Rome and see the height of the Capitoline Hill, among others. And some scholars even think that this refers to the Phoenician word meaning high place, pronounced, and I'm probably going to do this wrong, Rome. Vergil may in fact be making a bilingual pun here. Rome is high because of its hills, but also Rome means high in Phoenician. Carthage, by the way, which will play a huge role in the Aeneid and in Roman history, was a Phoenician colony, as we will learn about a few lines below. So these first 7 lines, so artfully crafted, bring up a lot of major themes. Aeneas himself is never mentioned by name, and many of the phrases used to describe him are passive in nature or sense. Profugus, exiled, jactatus, tossed, passus, suffering. We also see that Juno's rage, and rage in general, will play a huge role in the Aeneid. But there are hints of another theme too, Aeneas's piety, which will be made more explicit in the next set of lines. In Latin, pietas, commonly translated as piety, is devotion to your family, nation, and the gods. So Aeneas is primus, a leader. He founds a city for his people and future generations, and he brings his gods to Latium. We also learn that the gods are the cause of so much suffering, which happens even despite Rome's greatness. But how the gods affect mortals, and how Rome's greatness is tempered with suffering, are major themes of the Aeneid. And I think that it's cool that Vergil begins at Troy, Troiae, and ends at Rome, Romae. The next 4 lines, Vergil's invocation to the muse, will continue to establish more themes, so please keep going with me in my next video.